So we'll get into it. I've kind of done my introduction already. So as I said, I went to Ecuador. That's kind of there. These are just some pictures here of my time in Ecuador with the people I met. On the left there is the family that I stayed with. In the middle, I done some Spanish lessons while I was there. So they were the teachers I met, some pictures of the scenery. And then these are the children that I worked with, teaching soccer mainly. So just a quick little thing there. These are the companies that I'm working with. So EIL Ireland, they're the crowd who sent me on the scholarship. So they're kind of liaison. They organise the project that I'm dealing with, and I submit my stuff to them for my Global Citizen Award. BALT Chocolate is the chocolate company and production farm that I seen and visited while I was in Ecuador. So I'll talk a little bit about them more later. And then the Proper Chocolate Company is a company here in Dublin who produces chocolate specifically directly from chocolate beans to bar, and I've kind of come up with a partnership with both companies that I'll explain a little bit as we go along. Can everybody hear and see the screen there? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So part of my project is obviously around sustainability, and there's the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs as they're known, and there's 17 of them in total. My project itself focuses on one of those goals, which is goal 12, which we'll come to in a second. So I just have a quick video here. It's about 90 seconds long about the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm just going to play that there. Okay. So as you see there, the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them in total, and they're all kind of linked with each other. The one I'm focusing on today is Sustainable Development Goal 12, which is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns, and I'm mainly doing that around cocoa and chocolate. So if we link that with some of the other Sustainable Development Goals, like no poverty, or life on land, or sustainable communities and cities, we can link them kind of all together, but we'll just talk about this one most. So I'm just going to see here, the world continues to use natural resources unsustainably. You see in 2010 here, there was 73.2 billion tons of global material footprint. 2017, this had gone up to 86.9. If we look at electronic waste, this has grown by 38%, but less than 20% of this is recycled. That doesn't really cover kind of what I'm talking about today, chocolate. There's not really much electrical stuff involved in chocolate making in the lower half of the world anyway, which we'll get to in a second. But the idea of this goal is mainly to harvest, to transport, to storage, and the process, and to do this kind of all sustainably. And when I talk about fair trade and stuff like that later on in the presentation, you'll see that what's happening in the world around this and how we're trying to make it better for the people who produce this cocoa themselves. So my lecture today then kind of goes into cocoa and chocolate, What are they? We're going to look at the historical background of the birth of chocolate, particularly in the Mayan Legacy. We're going to look at what chocolate is and what other cocoa-based products are. We're going to then look at the process from tree itself, the cocoa tree, where the beans come from, all the way up to the chocolate bar being produced. We speak a little bit about raw chocolate and what that is, so the raw material used to make chocolate. We're going to look at how we can identify good chocolate and bad chocolate. Now, personally, I like chocolate, so I don't particularly see it as bad, but I'm starting to realize that some chocolate is mass produced and it's not very good taste. And usually the people who are profits don't get to see the best, the big global companies, they see the big profits and not the people. So I've started to look myself at the chocolate that I buy, particularly fair trade. I definitely think it's better taste. It is slightly a little bit more expensive, but at least I know then the people who are producing the cocoa are getting that. So that's kind of where I'm going with this today. I'm going to just then speak about the North versus Global South divide. Most of the cocoa in the world is produced in the Global South, but then it's sold in the Global North, as we call that. So like it's the Global North that's usually making the big profits from it, and the people in the South suffer because of that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the fair trade movement, particularly around chocolate. So I had kind of scheduled this here at this time to kind of that you could go to this website and put in your details, but because there's only a few people here, we might get a few people just to come in and speak maybe. So the question I had here on Mentimeter was, what's your favorite chocolate bar or your favorite chocolate company that you're aware of at the moment? So if anybody wants to come in there and maybe answer that question.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first? Sorry, I'm cutting somebody off.
Go ahead. Jackie.
I can't say I would know too many kind of companies that wouldn't be mass produced, let's say. But I suppose my favorite chocolate would be Galaxy, as opposed to Cadbury's.
Okay, so that's a big Nestle product. So we'll talk a little bit about Nestle then, maybe later on as well. Anybody else?
I like Lily O'Brien's, Mark.
Perfect. It's kind of a luxury chocolate, John, but again, it's a little bit mass produced and it's not necessarily fair trade, but we will talk about that as well. I did like Lily O'Brien's myself, but I'm trying to move away from them myself at the minute as well. So
yeah, I like Aero, Mark. Aero.
Perfect.
That'd be Nestle as well, isn't it?
So you're on the Nestle bandwagon as well, Gary. So
yeah.
Sorry, what about is it Guyland chocolates? I would buy them on holidays. I don't know where they come from though.
Yeah. So I'll come to them again when I move on through my lecture. They're one of the most kind of luxury brands that come in under a certain brand that I will speak about as we go on in the lecture as well. So, and they're actually one of the worst for treating people who produce chocolate. I'll come to them anyway. All right. So we're just going to talk about kind of the historical background and the birth of chocolate in the world. So the first use of the seeds of the cocoa tree. So I'm going to talk about that when we get to where it actually comes from. But chocolate or cocoa comes from the seeds of the cocoa tree, which then become cocoa beans. This was seen first as a food like predating Christianity, so before Christ 1800. And this is evidenced by findings that has been found across Mesoamerica. So if you look at the map here, Mesoamerica is kind of like Central America, kind of around like Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, places like that. How we know this is that residues of tyrambromine, which is kind of just like deposits that's left, and caffeine were found in vases. So like the people that used these, they had vases that they used the chocolate in, and these materials then have been found in these vases that predate Christianity. So that's where that comes from. The plant itself originated from the Amazon basin and was disseminated by men. So in around the Amazon basin region, I'll show you a map of that as we go on further as well, where that is. And then men obviously brought the beans, spread it out throughout the Central America region. And then that then went to other parts of the world that we'll come to then as well. So cacao is used widespread, usually in a plantation, and trade with cocoa or cacao was started by the Olmec civilization and continued then to further civilizations such as the Zapotecs, the Mayans, the Teotihuacans, the Toltecs, and the Mixtecs and the Aztecs. So most people probably would be familiar with the Aztecs or the Mayans, so you might have heard of them before, but there was civilizations long before them that had used this, and then it passed through the generations to the likes of the Mayans and the Aztecs, which is kind of more known. Sorry, no. If we then look at the Mayan legacy, so the Mayans are kind of the first civilization that we would kind of encounter before the Aztecs, and we see that not much was written by the Olmecs, and not much of that has survived, but many Mayan hieroglyphics have been found, and these show the significance of chocolate. So the Mayans used hieroglyphics just like the Egyptians did, and they drew things on walls and clays and stuff like that, and they highlighted how important chocolate was to them. So they showed them vases and things that they drank out of. They decorated these with how they used chocolate and stuff like that. So we see here some of the vases that there's some decorations on and some hieroglyphics here. And these showed that the drink was prepared as like a chocolate syrup or a hot chocolate, and this was put into the vase to drink from. So if we look at the steps that they used, and this is kind of old kind of language that they used, so yam caraco was like a chocolate foam that they made from the drink, and then they drank that then themselves. And then they had takan kai, which is when they roasted or toasted the cocoa. And then they got the foam then from this when they roasted it and mixed it with water or milk. And then they poured this chocolate drink then from one vessel to the other. So they usually got the cocoa beans, roasted it, mixed it with water or milk, and then passed that from vessel to vessel that they would drink around it. When we look at chocolate, basically it's simply a presentation or a preparation made from cocoa seeds. We'll talk about that in a second. There is various ways that you can prepare the chocolate. It has been consumed mostly down through the ages as a drink that was usually mixed with maize or cornmeal, plus then milk from sheep, cows, or goats. And this is how it was used in the majority of its existence. And we still have that today with like hot chocolate and cocoa. And in South America, and particularly in Ecuador, where I was, there's certain hot chocolate drinks that are very popular and famous. In the 16th and 17th century, then there was a big debate that chocolate was used maybe as a food or a poison or as a medicine. And we do have documented cases to show that chocolate was used as a cover-up flavor for poisons. So the Mayans and the Aztecs, and even throughout further down the years, they'd look to poison their enemies or people, and they'd usually mix that with chocolate or wine or other products to mask the taste of the poison. We then seen that over time, particularly in Western cultures, that cocoa was modified to include different ingredients, particularly sugars. So like when we look at milk chocolate today, and I'll go into the process of that in a second, like most of the chocolate that we eat today is usually mixed with sugars or spices, herbs, milks, different things like that. And the first bar of milk chocolate was not created until the 19th century. So it was around the late 1700s in the UK. So, but if we look at chocolate in today's world, we usually refer to chocolate as a solid suspension of cocoa-based particles. So if we look at a chocolate bar itself, that's solid chocolate that has a mixture of different cocoa ingredients or different processes that we'll talk about in a second. And then, as I said, usually mixed with dairy or non-dairy milks, emulsifiers, and non-cocoa fats. This is just a piece that I found, that was written in 1631, and it was written in a piece called Sweeten It the Bread, and it kind of just explains like that chocolate was even thought of or talked about then. So we won't worry about the big words like vehemently incites to Venus. And you can see the old English here, but like if we read down through here, it says that chocolate, cocoa it's very excellent for digestion, cures consumptions, and the green sickness. jaundice and all manner of inflammations and obstructions. So they're saying here that chocolate was good for common ailments, particularly of the stomach and the digestive tract. Then it says it takes away the Morpheus, cleans the teeth. I'm not sure what Morpheus is, but I'm sure, you know, they're saying there it takes away something, cleans the teeth, and then helps with the cough or cough of the lungs. And then the new disease kind of that they speak of then is, you know, the disease that the Spanish brought to the peoples in South America, kind of like, you know, plague, Black Death, stuff like this. And they're saying that it helps this by clearing the guts, or flushes out urine, causes, you know, helps expel stones and poisons, and then preserves and protects from infectious diseases. So this was just this kind of Spanish kind of settler in South America who had said this. Again, I've kind of put up at this stage another kind of Mentimeter question here, but I'll kind of just speak about it again and maybe get people to interact. So the question was, does anybody know one of the 6 main countries in the world where cocoa was produced? And then we're kind of going to move on to that a little bit then. So does anybody want to come in there?
To be honest with you, I haven't a clue. Sorry. Can't even
That's
take the
okay.
guess.
Yeah.
Would they be mainly West African, Mark?
What's that, Yasmin? Sorry.
Would they be mainly West African countries?
Yeah. So like, you're right. You're on the right track there, Yasmin. Anyway, most of the chocolate in the world is produced in West Africa. Each individual country, I'll list them off when we get further on here as well. Anybody else want to hanker a guess? No. Okay,
India?
we'll move on there anyway. Sorry. Somebody come in there?
India?
Okay, good guess, but you're not on the right track there just at the minute. But
Okay.
there is some produced there, but wouldn't be one of the top 6. But this map that we'll see now on this slide will kind of help us here. So when we look at cocoa, or, you know, I'll show you where it comes from in a second, but the plant or the tree that it comes from. But these trees, where these seeds or plants grow, is mainly in one region in the world, and they're usually in tropical regions, but they're usually between the latitudes of the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. So you see on the map here the red belts that I've put up. This is kind of just above and just below the equator, and these are the main countries where we look at that. So we see India is there, but it wouldn't be the big producer. So we see the dark red producers are mostly in Brazil, Ecuador, West Africa, like Ghana or Ivory Coast, and then Indonesia and places like that. So the reasons why then cocoa grows in this best is because the climate suits this, and the slight acidic or alkaline soil then helps that, and then the ground and the soil there is quite coarse, so this kind of helps nutrients in the soil, and the soil then holds water in, which is good for drainage and good for the production of the cocoa bean or seed. And then this area of the world then is known for subhymoan midges, and they're kind of midges that also carry malaria. But these midges then pollinate the cocoa beans, which then produce the chocolate then going forward. If we look here then at this slide I have here, so these are the latest figures I could find was in 2011, and this shows you kind of the percentage of the top 10 cocoa producing countries in the world. So when we look here, we see Cote d'Ivoire, which is Ivory Coast, Ghana, they're kind of the West African countries, Cameroon as well. And then if we look at South America, you see like Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, some of the Caribbean, like the Dominican Republic. And then if we go west towards Pacific, we can see places like Indonesia. India doesn't come in the top 10 there, but it would come in probably down around 12, 13, 14. If anybody has any questions while we go along, you can ask away as well. We don't have a big group that, like, just come in at any time if you want, all right? If we classify cocoa, then there's different types of cocoa beans, where they come from. And I spoke to you earlier about that the original place where cocoa came from was the Amazon basin. And this map here of South America is the Amazon basin that it shows us. So mainly around the countries of Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Suriname, Guyana, and then you'd obviously see the beans then traveled up this coast here towards, Central America, Mexico, the Aztecs, and the Mayans that we spoke about. And for anybody who's interested, where I was in Ecuador, Ecuador is on the coast just around here. So that's, sorry, just around here. So that's where I had visited in my trip. So in Venezuela in the late 1800s, there was 3 types of cocoa beans that were defined, and this is where most of the chocolate in the world comes from, or the varieties come from now. So we look at 3 different varieties here. We have Criollo or Creole. These are known as native beans that come directly from this Amazon basin region. And if we look at the seeds, we can trace them back, this particular bean, to Venezuela, Colombia, and Peru. And then we have the Forastero, or the foreign region, and this means that they come from further up. So this comes further up the Amazon basin, up this way towards Central America. And then we have the Trinitario from Trinidad, which is a hybrid that was produced from the Criollo and Forastero types. And this was usually produced first in around, Caribbean region of Trinidad and Tobago, and then Dominican Republic, Grenada, places like that where chocolate are kind of famous at the moment too. These are the 3 varieties. I don't expect you to read through all this here, but if you get to look at the slides, maybe in the future you can have a look through that yourself. But you see the 3 different varieties of cocoa beans. So these are cocoa beans here. These are the 3 varieties. You see they're different colors, slightly different shapes. And this is actually a fruit. And we'll talk about that fruit where the cocoa beans come from in a second. So when we look at chocolate, what is it? Like, what is it made from? And this is kind of what we're going to go into now. So in the EU, they say that chocolate must contain one or all of these ingredients here. So cocoa nibs, which is also called cocoa mass when it's grounded. And I will go into the production now in a few minutes, like of how we get from a fruit to these pictures, let's see, that you see here. And then when cocoa nibs are ground down and then they're put into a machine that can spin them and gel it together, and that's where we get cocoa butter. So we get some oil that comes off that, and that's what's called cocoa butter. And then when we grind down what's left of these nibs, we get what's called cocoa powder. So the EU says that chocolate must have one of those ingredients, whether it be cocoa nibs, cocoa butter, or cocoa powder. And obviously, when we talk about better chocolate, they usually come from direct from this, whereas the likes of your Nestle and Cadbury's are using very limited source of these to make mass production. So when you're eating your Nestle products, they probably only contain very limited amounts of one or some of these. If we look at darker milk chocolate, we're saying the EU says that dark chocolate must have a minimum of 35% of a cocoa-based ingredient, so minimum of 35% of nibs, butter, or powder, and 14% of this must be non-fat. So the butter is probably not going to go in there if it's non-fat. But we see here that 18% of it must be cocoa butter, so that kind of even contradicts itself there. And then if we look at milk chocolate, 25% of this must have the cocoa-based ingredient of the 3 that we mentioned above, and 2.5% of this must be non-fat, and at least 14% dairy. Dairy doesn't have to be, milk or cream. That's obviously what's used mostly, but you can also use milk powder or cream powders. And a lot of the companies don't even use milk as the liquid. They usually use the powder. And again, this should not contain fat greater than 25%. And then if we look at white chocolate doesn't contain any cocoa fruit or nibs itself. It comes directly from the butter that comes from the product. So white chocolate doesn't have any natural cocoa nibs or fruit used in white chocolate. It's all the butter that's used there. So this is kind of where we start kind of going into the process of how we make chocolate direct from the bean. So we see here, this is the bean growing on the tree. And then this is the fruit inside. It doesn't look too healthy or nice, but this fruit is edible. It's not eaten a lot, but kind of, it's very lemony in taste, very bitter. It was used to make wine in in Columbian time, in old Columbian times. They used to make wine from this because it was so bitter. And when you open this fruit here and you crack it open here like this, it decays and rots very quickly. So when you're producing chocolate, you need to get the process started very quickly, or it just starts to rot away and decay. Sorry, no. So this is why, for financial reasons, that cocoa is usually not exported fresh like this. It's usually the process starts in the country, we'll say like West Africa, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Ecuador, and they usually do all these processes, and then the product is sent to Europe, usually then to make the bar itself. So it's because it rots very quickly that, for financial reasons, we don't usually get the main fruit exported. And I will be talking about kind of a collaboration that I have at the end, and I'll explain about that we're not going to be using fresh fruits there either because of that reason. Each pod or bean then usually contains between 20 and 75 beans. So you see these beans here, these beans here beside the fruit. They're beans that have gone through the process. They've gone to the next stage, which I'll come to in a second. But when the trees, usually at their highest maturity, is between 10 and 15 years old, and that's when the beans produce the most beans, usually the higher end of, up around the 75. The next step then is fermentation. So what happens is they usually take these beans. I'll just go back there. So they take this fruit here, all these little things here, and they scoop out this pulp. And that's when we get it to this stage, and it's put kind of on trays like this here, covered with leaves. And what happens is then it's allowed to ferment for a couple of days, or usually a couple of weeks. And when it ferments, kind of does slightly rot a little bit, but that stops the germination phase. This also then helps create flavor. So usually this is done 6 hours after the picking of the fruit, and then, as I said to you there, the beans are all heaped together with the pulp, and the natural yeast then helps to break down the natural sugars and the natural alcohols. And then sometimes the temperature, if you put a thermometer into this here, the temperature could rise as high as 55 degrees Celsius. And as I said to you there, then these beans usually take about 2 days to 2 weeks to harden and turn brown, and we see them turning brown in this picture here. And then around the world, there's different kind of ways that they use for this fermentation process. So like in West Africa, in the picture here, we see that it's put on the ground on, on maybe wooden crates and then covered with banana leaves. In Ecuador, I seen them using sweat boxes where they put them kind of into large containers and they cover with a lid and they come back to them then afterwards. And then you see in some places they use things like canoes, where wooden canoes have been cut out to put the beans inside and cover with banana leaves. Again, when they're being dried, so we see the pictures here, this is in West Africa, you see them on the wooden slats here, and like we're seeing lots of cocoa beans here going through the drying process. The process is slow to do this, as I said, usually between 2 and 2 weeks. And the moisture content is hugely reduced, usually down to around 6 or 8%. And once we get to this stage where they go as a bean and they're hardened, they usually then have a shelf life of about 5 years. So this is the product usually that we see then transported in sacks to big companies or to Europe to make chocolate. So these processes here are usually made or done in the country of origin. So whether that be West Africa or Ecuador or places like that. The techniques that they use most often is used, which is sun drying, so laid out here in the sun. So in this region of the, on the equator, as I said, sunshine is usually quite hot, and particularly as we know in West Africa, and that helps the drying process. So it's used simply on mats, trays, or concrete floors. In South America and the Caribbean, they usually use concrete. In Ecuador, I've seen them using sweat boxes, as I said. And then in other places, and particularly in South America, in Brazil and Ecuador, and then if we look at Southeast Asia, like India and Indonesia, they usually use artificial drying. So they use big like hair dryer kind of things where they dry it out with machines. And I didn't see that in the small place that I went to in Ecuador, but they do use artificial methods in some places in Ecuador. Beans then are sorted into sacks, as you see kind of here, and that's what we use to transport. And the temperature is carefully monitored at this stage because you don't want it to rot. If it goes above 65 degrees Celsius, this is too hot, and this can cause the beans to become very acidic, and then it stops the fermentation process pretty quickly. So that's not good for pleasant chocolate, as we will speak about again when we get to it. And then if it's too cold, then what happens is that mold starts to develop on the beans, and again, that's bad for the chocolate. And this kind of gives not nice flavors. And a lot of the big companies, I will speak about them when we get to them, a lot of the big companies don't actually care whether the flavors are too hot or too cold, because they usually mask the flavors then with sugars or different things like vanilla or different flavors. So the big companies actually don't mind how it is, because they're just going to add all those ingredients in to mask the flavor, basically. Once the beans are dried, then they're usually placed in 60 or 70 kg Hessian sacks and stored in a temperature that's, usually moisture controlled. So in Ecuador, what they used kind of big sheds that were kind of very rustically made and covered with big tree leaves that kind of helped keep the sun away from that. At this stage, then what can happen is that there's certain moths that usually attack the beans. This particular moth here we see here, and they usually can burrow into the bags and stuff. They burrow through the shell and the nib and hatch inside the bean, and this usually happens in kind of warmer areas. So this is why they're trying to reduce the heat and make it cooler, that these moths then don't like the cold, and that helps eliminate them. So I'm kind of going back on a few little things here, but we spoke about these things and how it happens. So in the EU, the chocolate may contain sweeteners such as sugar, and this can be raw or refined. And then they usually add sugar alcohols that could give the flavor, as I said there. And these are usually added to mask flavor, and too much of these masking agents usually produce poor chocolate. So I'm not sure, like maybe a few people here haven't really tasted pure chocolate or fair trade chocolate. There is a big difference between the flavor, let's say, in your fair trade chocolate versus your Nestle product or your Mars bar or your Aero or your Galaxy. And I would have liked Galaxy chocolate. It was one of my favorite, but the comparison to fair trade or real chocolate just is, it's completely different. So until you actually sit down and taste these products and know how to taste them and how to watch them, you will probably never understand that Nestle in particular is just full of these masking agents. There's usually then emulsifiers that can be added there, such as sunflower oil, palm oil, stuff like that. And then cocoa fats such as cocoa butter or equivalents are usually added to bulk up the whey, usually by 5%. And we're finding the big companies now are starting to use cheaper products instead of cocoa butter. So they would put small amounts of cocoa butter in to give that cocoa flavor, but then they'll bulk it up with big things like palm oil, shea butter, sal fat, or Ilipi butters. And this mimics the properties of cocoa butter, but it doesn't actually give that flavor. So then they add more sugar then to make it sweeter. I don't know if anybody has noticed this, but I've noticed in particularly the last couple of Christmases, particularly with Cadbury's products and roses, I can actually kind of taste that the chocolate has tasted a lot different than maybe 10 years ago. And that's because Cadbury's have now started to use palm oil, and that's because that's cheaper to source than cocoa butter. If we look then at what's not added to chocolate, so in the European Union, no animal fats or CBE fats are allowed to be added to chocolate. No flour, starches, or nut butters are added. And then in certain products, such as guajua, which is a certain type of chocolate, they usually use the chocolate as an additive. So like vermicellis is kind of like a noodle and stuff like that, and they usually add certain starches and stuff. They don't use that in chocolate. And then we see that more than 1.75% of cocoa husks in the cocoa mass is used. So this is health and safety measure as husks are at risk of containing heavy metals and toxins. So when you break down that seed, and I'm going to come to that again in a second, you break that seed down to the shell, the brown little thing that we've seen there, the husk is broken away from that, and then the nib is inside, which we'll get to now. But we don't want more than 1.7%, 0.75% of the husk going into chocolate, because the husk contains the materials that are bad to us. So when we then crack that shell open, so the drying process, you've seen the fruit going from the drying process, then we crack that down. That's usually done in a machine, even in Ecuador, in the world, in West African places. They usually do this not by hand, but by machine or by grinding with stones. And then we get the nib inside, which is this here. This is the main thing that's used to make chocolate. And when I was in Ecuador, you know, does anybody like crunchy? Anybody?
Crunchy, Cadbury's crunchy.
Cadbury's crunchy, yeah. So
Yeah,
you know
why
that
not?
you know that texture of crunchy, you kind of get those nice hard bits inside. When I was in Ecuador, they made chocolate with these inside the chocolate, and these created the crunch, and it tasted far better. So like crunchy is not honeycomb, it's actually false product, which is caramel with bicarbonate soda added, which gives it a honeycomb shape. But this natural product, the nib in Ecuador, they use to give that crunch, and I just thought that was delicious. So we see then the cocoa nibs. These are the seeds of the cocoa fruit. Each of those cocoa fruits that I showed you has two segments. So if you break it in half, it comes in half like this, one side and one side. So each segment then has one row of beans, and then we ferment them again and then break the shell open to get this nib. So after the fermentation and drying process, the husk is removed and we're left then with this nib. And if we break this nib down, so they usually put these nibs then into a machine, and the machine is spun, and then that spun then creates a mass, which is then the cocoa butter. So when we get to this process, then there's less than 1% moisture. So we see we've got it down to about 5 to 8% moisture. And then we get to this process, then it's down to about 1% moisture. So this machine inside here, and I'm going to show you a video in a second of how it's done and produced. So the nibs go in here and it's grinded down until it becomes cocoa mass. And then depending on the quality and the origin of this, that decides what it's used for in the future. So most small chocolate producers, let's say like the Proper Chocolate Company, who I will talk about, they use pure cocoa mass from this here. Whereas somebody like the big producers like Nestle, they will use small amounts of this, and then they will add things like shea butter or palm oil to bulk it out. So there's very small amounts of chocolate for mass production. Obviously, bigger, so less cost, bigger profit margins. And I'll talk about that when we come to kind of fair trade and stuff like that. So this then is cocoa powder. So cocoa powder is what's left then after we grind it down and we get the butter. The powder that's left in this then, that's known as cocoa powder. And this is the leftover from the pressing process. This comes out solid, usually kind of like a cake. That's the way we can describe it. So you see in the picture here, it's kind of dry and powdery. And this sometimes then can be broken down even smaller. And this is kind of what's like cocoa powder is made from, or hot chocolate powder is made from. And it comes in kind of different forms. You kind of got the natural form, which is lighter in color. This is very popular in the US, so the one on the left here. And then in Europe, we tend to bash it down more to get a darker color, which is called Dutched. And then this is kind of what we see. So if you see like Cadbury's Bournville dark chocolates made from this, or we look at Cadbury's Bournville powder for drink, we see it's this dark color. And then at this stage, then the fat is obviously reduced from the butter. It's less than 20%. And cocoa powder must have less than 20% fat.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Sorry, I might have missed something, but how do you get the darker color again?
So the darker color is used when you grind it down further. So when you grind up the beans to get butter, you got the powder left at the end. That powder is this natural color, but then in Europe we grind that down, we bash that down further, and that becomes darker then.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. So this is kind of just a quick overview of how we get from bean to bar, and I kind of just talked about that process. So we spoke about sorting the cocoa beans, we spoke about roasting them in the sun, we spoke about cracking or winnowing them, and then I'm kind of going into this process now of refining and conching, aging and tempering and molding. This is kind of the boring bit, but if you bear with me. So if we look at raw chocolate, we see here the beans here again. They have been roasted, sometimes in the sun or sometimes put then into cookers or ovens to roast them down further. Raw chocolate companies usually use fermented and dried cocoa beans and then mill and temper them. So what I said there is these beans go into that machine and they're pulverized down then into the butter. And most small companies will do it that way. The bigger companies then will start adding things to it. If we see here that flavor-wise, chocolate is made from unroasted cocoa beans, it will obviously taste different, usually more acidic. So it'll be more like the fruit that I said to you at the beginning. If we don't roast it, they're going to taste more lemony and bitter. When we look then at chocolate making itself, and I'm taking this from the proper chocolate company who I'm dealing with at the moment, and I'll talk, I keep saying I'll talk about them, which I'll get to, but they've kind of told me how they use this process to do this. So there's two ways of making chocolate, or two approaches, and usually just two intentions, the reason for this. So big chocolate industrial manufacturers are usually driven by two objectives, usually the consistency of the flavor over the years. So if Nestle decided to change their product now, people will probably say, this is not nice, it's different. So they try to keep it the same, the way they've had it for years. So lots of sugar, lots of added products. So if Nestle decided to change to use raw chocolate, we get a completely different taste, and then people will probably say, no, I don't like this. But this is why the big companies stick to the same thing all the time, because the main thing is because of profit. So their intention, their approach is always the same, to have minimum chocolate, add lots of ingredients like sugar and palm oil and stuff like that, and then big profit, so sell as much of it as possible. So this is usually done because it's low production cost, it's cheap, and then it doesn't really help the flavor. Small chocolate producers then, like the place that I was in Ecuador, or the proper chocolate company in Dublin who I'm dealing with at the moment, what they do is they take the beans themselves and they develop flavors from that. So they might roast some beans, they might not. They might go through different things. So like Kelly and Patrick in the proper chocolate company who I'm dealing with, they buy small batches, maybe 1 or 2 sacks of beans, and from different regions in the world, and they might say, right, today we'll make a Dominican Republic chocolate, we might roast this one for this bar, and we might the next day not roast it and see what the different flavors like. So they're not about the profit, they're about seeing what the quality of the chocolate is like, or what different flavors can like. So this is where we see seasonal variations, because they take the crop and they take it like, do we take it today, or in 3 months' time they might take another one, and that chocolate might completely taste different. So how do we know how chocolate is of a higher quality? And I know there's a lot of text here, you don't need to read down through it, I'll kind of just explain it, and I would try not to go through the whole thing. But obviously, as I said, if we look at the chocolate and we look at the content of cocoa butter and of pure chocolate, that'll tell us obviously that the chocolate is better. If we look out for things like palm oil or additives, that'll tell us that the chocolate's obviously of lesser quality, because they're trying to mask that flavor. So I keep kind of going on about that, but like the reason why there's so much sugar in milk chocolate and higher chocolate products is to mask that it's lesser quality bean. And remember, they're trying to do this as quickly as possible, as cheap as possible, to gain that biggest profit. I'm going to skip that on there because I kind of just explained that there. If we look at just kind of terminology around chocolate making, and like Patrick and Kelly have kind of highlighted this to me, that, you know, it's important to look at this. So a chocolatier is somebody who usually handles pre-made chocolate confectionery products such as bars, bonbons, and truffles and various ingredients. So like if we, I'm thinking in Dublin, if we go into somewhere like the Chocolate Hotel on, it's not Moore Street, but no, just off Moore Street, the main shopping street there, just Chocolate Hotel there, they would be chocolatiers. They're already handling the chocolate that's got to the final stage, and then they're molding it into bars or bunnies or things like that. Chocolate maker then is somebody like the proper chocolate company, like Patrick and Kelly, and they use the whole, chocolate maker is somebody like, say, Nestle or somebody like that, who use the ingredients, whether that be all the ingredients, some ingredients, or less ingredients. And then somebody like Patrick and Kelly, they're bean to bar producers. So they take the beans directly from the sack and go through the whole process of grinding it down, getting the mass, then making the chocolate into a bar or a bunny or an egg, things like this. So they're producing the chocolate all the way from bean to bar. And then we've got small micro batch chocolates, and Patrick and Kelly in the Proper Chocolate Company, they, as I said, they produce things in small quantities. So they might take one bag this week and make one product from that. And then they might take another bag from somewhere else in the world next week and make a complete small micro batch. So they're not producing boxes of thousands of bars of chocolate. They might be producing maybe less than 100 bars of chocolate of the one type to produce. And if you look at kind of like their Easter eggs and stuff at the moment, like you might get one type and you might be lucky to get maybe 30 eggs that you might get one of. And then you could buy another egg, maybe 30 produced, but it'd be completely different chocolate. So again, I'm not going to go through all of this, but when we get to the tempering and molding stage, when we get to that chocolate butter or mass, this then is melted down at high temperatures, and then we add the sugar or the butter or the milk or whatever we're doing there, and then we temper or mold it. So we basically put it with heat, we melt it down, and then we put it into a mold, and then that mold then can be left to go cold, and then we get the bar then for packaging. So I'm just going to watch the time here. We're good for time, so maybe another, we're probably going to have about another 20 minutes. Is everybody okay with that? Yeah. So this video itself is kind of telling you how to make, how chocolate is made. It's about 10 minutes long. We'll try to let as much of it play as possible, that you see the process. I probably won't play the whole lot, but we'll see how far we can get with it. And if anybody's got any questions, maybe we'll just wait till after the 10 minutes. Is that playing there?
No, not seen it yet.
Anything there?
No.
Perfect. Sorry, you just give me 1 second. I'll get that sorted. Is that playing there now?
There's a video, but there's no sound.
Perfect. Let's see, can I get the sound here as well? Any sound?
No.
Okay. Maybe we'll just watch it and I'll keep going, because I'm not sure if I can get the sound or not. But, I'll just keep going there.
Okay.
Okay, guys, I'm going to stop that there. So did you get to see the process of what's happening with the beans and how they're made, how they're harvested and
Yeah, very
dried
interesting.
and roasted?
Very
Things like that.
interesting.
All right, so and hopefully you were able to see the captions that I put up at the end if you
Yeah,
couldn't hear the
you
sound.
were.
All right, so I'm just going to maybe it'll be another 10 minutes or so till I finish up. I just want to go on about the fair trade bit a little bit, and then we're done then. All right.
The sun is shining. It is a very hot day. Oh, what a lovely hot day. George is wearing Oh dear, the sun is so hot that the puddles have dried up.
Mommy, Daddy, the puddles are all dry. And we can't jump in them.
Never mind, Pepper. It's so sunny, you can play in the paddling pool instead.
Yes, the paddling pool.
Who's enjoying Peppa Pig?
No swimming costumes.
Yes,
Pepper and George are wearing their swimming costumes. Mummy Pig is wearing her swimming costume. And Daddy Pig is wearing his swimming costume. Because it's so hot, you need sun.
Okay, we can all see that there again, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the fair trade process. The video kind of introduced you to the fair trade process a little bit. And if we look at fair trade, not just in chocolate, but if we look at in Ireland in particular, Ireland is ranked at 7 in the world for retailing fair trade products. So that's kind of fairly okay. If we look at, we consume 5 million bananas a week in Ireland. 82% of people in Ireland recognise the fair trade mark. Is everybody aware of this mark here?
Yes,
Would people have seen this before? Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, became one of the first parliaments to recognise the fair trade brand in 2008. And then, like, if we just look at like current things that happen in Ireland, maybe not with COVID, but the Electric Picnic became the first fair trade music and arts festival in Ireland in 2012. And then I just kind of want to ask yourselves, like, to consider these questions yourself, and maybe if anybody has, I want maybe to get 1 or 2 ideas what people think about what child labour. So the problem with cocoa production is in most of the world, there's a lot of child labour used in that. And what the fair trade process looks to do is not to have children producing cocoa and harvesting things like that. And a lot of the bigger companies, I think Nestle have moved away from it, but particularly Guyane and some other top range brands have committed to reducing children being involved in the process, but they haven't pushed it through, and there's still a lot of children producing cocoa. So child labour is not an idea from the past. There's over 1.5 million children in the world who work in cocoa production, and a lot of these is in particularly in West Africa. If we just look at them, chocolate is a huge business. It's worth 83 billion a year. This is larger than the total earnings of more than 130 countries in the whole world. And we see there that only half of the world's chocolate is, sorry, only 0.5% of the world's chocolate is fair trade. So that's a tiny amount. And then I just kind of want to highlight this to you because I was at a seminar recently and they showed an Oxfam study. And just kind of point this out to you. In 2020, an Oxfam report showed that 26 of the richest people in the world earn the same amount of money as half of the whole world. Right? So I just kind of want you to take that
Mark,
figure
sorry,
into
I
consideration.
can't really hear you. There's Peppa Pig is on in the background.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm just babysitting.
Perfect.
Can you mute?
Perfect. Mute is fine there, thank you. So I just kind of want you to understand these figures. I'll just take them in a little bit anyway as well. So most people in the world earn between $2 and $10 a day. Now in Ireland, we kind of might laugh at that because we're nowhere near that. But if you take, I'll just give you kind of an idea here. When I was in Ecuador, the highest earning people there, like top professionals, college professors, their average income is around $600 per month. Now, if you compare that, would say, to somebody like myself who's at college, who's on back to education allowance, my back to education allowance probably is equivalent to the highest earner in Ecuador. So that'll tell you the lowest earning person in Ecuador dealing with chocolate is probably on less than $1 a day. And the people that I was talking to in Ecuador are lucky to have one meal per day. So we just need to be aware of that, I think. All right. We need to be aware that most people in the world, and I'm not talking in the Western world, I'm talking in the world fully, most people in the world are most of the time one paycheck away from absolute poverty, and that includes chocolate producers. And I just found this a little bit fascinating for people if they want to kind of understand this. The Oxfam report highlighted that if the 10 most wealthiest billionaires in the world, and if we talk about like big people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and people like this, like they are all saying, "Oh, I'm great, I give my earnings to charity and I think do this," but they're still millionaires themselves. If we taxed the 10 highest billionaires in the world, we would be able to have nobody in the world in poverty, full stop. So we should maybe ask ourselves the question, like, what are our governments doing? Why aren't we taxing the high earners? So we just need to be kind of looking at that. And then the last figure I'll give you on this one is that 2,153 billionaires in the world have more wealth than the rest of the 4.6 billion people in the world. So like, for those small people who are absolute billionaires, the majority of the people in the world are on next to nothing. And I just ask you to maybe consider those figures a little bit, and maybe we can discuss that a little bit if you have questions. If we look then at like the top 5 reasons why fair trade makes change happen. So fair trade improves the lives of farmers. It does this because, you know, we're giving them a better price for the product, and we're trying to cut out the child labor there as well. Fair trade means fair compensation for all. So it's not just billionaires or big companies making the money, everybody's getting a fair price. As I said there, it helps to combat child labor. And then in the video, we heard that young farmers are moving away from cocoa producing because it doesn't produce enough money, and they're looking at products like palm oil and stuff like that, which is more harmful to the environment. And then I can't see the bottom slide there. Can anyone read the bottom bit there for me, because I have everybody's face in the way? Yeah.
Fair trade encourages environmental stability.
Yeah. So if we go back to what I started off kind of today about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we looked at, like, we're trying to help protect the environment and things like this as well. So obviously helping fair trade also helps the environment, because we're helping use natural products, using natural ways to harvest that product. If we're going fair trade, we're trying to move away from like using pesticides and things like that as well. I won't show you that video because I've kind of just discussed about fair trade in the last video. I'm just going to talk about a little bit about the big guys in the chocolate world. So we spoke earlier about like the Nestle's, the Cadbury's, and the Hershey's, particularly in the US. But like in Europe, we'd probably be more aware of Nestle and Cadbury. And Nestle and Cadbury are the big guys. They're the ones making huge profits from chocolate. And as I explained to you in the chocolate making process, they're also the ones using the least amount of chocolate product in their actual chocolate products. So who are the winners here? So I said to you earlier on that I would speak about Guyane chocolates, and Guyane chocolates are also, they also come under the brand of Godiva. And Godiva is the biggest chocolate inheritor of profit in the world. So they earn half more of what Nestle, Hershey, and Cadbury's combined total is, and these are complete luxury brand chocolate. I know in Ireland I've never seen Godiva chocolates, but they're huge brand worldwide, top of the range, and their profits are absolutely phenomenal, and they're not fair trade. So then who are the losers? I just kind of point out that 2 million children are involved in the chocolate or cocoa producing trade in the world. These are usually involved in things like swinging machetes, carrying heavy loads, spraying insecticides, which is all harmful. So like, although this is harmful to adults, it's also harmful to children. So we need to question, like, if we're not using fair trade, why are we allowing children to work in these kind of conditions? And then I just want to ask you these question here. And I'm asking this to everybody. How many people do you think in the world have been jailed, charged, or fined for using children in chocolate making products? So I'll put that question to everybody there. Just maybe a rough figure.
0. 0.
Yeah, well done, Gary. That's correct answer. So nobody in the world has been prosecuted, jailed, or fined for using children. And this is despite these big chocolate companies like Nestle, Hershey's, Cadbury's, Goyan, despite them saying we're reducing using children. They usually, like, even if you go on like Nestle's website, and they'll talk about fair trade and reducing their capacity of using children, but they're not going to say when they're going to fully phase that out. So again, I just ask you to be aware of that. And then the last thing I'll kind of give you here then is some chocolate facts around fair trade. So we just look at Ireland as the third largest consumer of chocolate in the whole of Europe. The average person in Ireland eats 7.7 kilograms of chocolate. And to give you an idea, that's about the size of a sperm whale's brain, all right, or about 12 guinea pigs. So I don't know whether, when you hear sperm whale, that sounds huge, but 12 guinea pigs will tell you the size of a sperm whale's brain. But at the same time, that's an awful lot of chocolate for one person. And again, I'll give you a little fun fact here. In Ecuador, a delicacy is to eat guinea pig. I didn't try that while I was there. We spoke about that 70% of cocoa in the whole world is grown in West Africa, and particularly Ghana and Ivory Coast. The average cocoa bean or pod averages 20 to 60 beans. 90% of the world's cocoa comes from small family-grown farms. And then if we talk about fair trade, like, we're trying to keep the younger generation to come in then into the family farm and keep that going. So if we give a better price, they might keep that going. This is something I want to point out. Most people who harvest, grow chocolate have never, or cocoa, have never actually tasted chocolate in their lives. So the women who I spoke to in Ecuador at the small farm there had never tasted the chocolate or the cocoa that they gave to produce chocolate until the company who I'm dealing with, and I'll cover that in a second, decided to come in and buy their products fair, and then brought them the end product at the end to taste. So like, the majority of people who produce cocoa in the world have never actually tasted what chocolate is like. They're used to tasting the fruit, the lemon, the zesty thing, but they've never tasted the finished product. And I'm sure we're all very, very, what's the word I'm trying to use? We all love chocolate, basically, me included. So I can't imagine what somebody would be like for them to never have tasted chocolate. And then I spoke about kind of poverty, that most cocoa farmers generally live in poverty. The average income per day is $1. And then we looked at the moment, the average cocoa farmer age is about 50. And that's because the younger generation aren't picking that up. So the fair trade movement is trying to get them to go with that. I won't play the video. I'll just finish kind of up here now, guys. So if you want to look up this video, it's called a home delivery service. It's made by Fairtrade and Oxfam UK, and they just kind of show a video that they kind of set up a scenario where they ask people, would you be interested in cheap products from this particular false company? And then when the children came to the door delivering the products, carrying big sacks, carrying bags, the people were horrified, kind of looking at this going, oh my God, why are children doing this? So it just kind of highlights that. And then people question then, well, why are we allowing this happen in other parts of the world where children are involved? I'm going to come back to that last slide in 1 second. If everybody can just see me here, I just want to kind of point out a few chocolate products. So if we were not online and because of COVID, obviously I would be showing you products at each phase rather than just pictures, and I'd be letting you taste chocolates and stuff like this. But I just went to the shops this morning, and I just went to Lidl, and just in particular, Lidl have a very good selection of fair trade chocolate. So if you look at this here, I'm just showing you a couple of bars here. These are all fair trade. None of these bars is more than €2. Like you can see the size of this in comparison, let's say, to your 150 or €2 Galaxy or Aero. And I'd urge you to maybe try and look for these products and to try them. Much better taste, I can guarantee you that. I just found this morning then as well. So this is a single origin Easter egg in Lidl at the moment from Ecuador. Me being in Ecuador, Ecuador. So if people are interested in that, this is on sale in Lidl at the moment. And I'm not here to kind of promote products or things like that, because I just want to promote that they're fair trade. And finally, I'm going to finish up with what I'm doing in my other project. So I have 2 projects to complete for my Global Citizen Award. This is the first one. And then the second one, what I've tried to do is I've tried to find a company in Ireland. So I found the Proper Chocolate Company in Dublin, and they're a bean to bar producer, owned and run by Patrick and Kelly on the left here. And I've spoke to them and I've went to them and I've asked them, would they consider looking to buy beans fair trade from Ecuador? So then what I did was I went back to the cocoa farm that I visited in Ecuador, to Claudia Ponce, and I put them in touch with each other. So Patrick and Kelly are going to source cocoa beans directly from Ecuador, from Claudia. And what they're going to do for me, they're going to produce a small, maybe less than 100 bars of Ecuadorian chocolate. And they are going to sell that then through their chocolate shop and through their website. And this is kind of all still in the early development stage, but I've discussed with Patrick and Kelly that the profits that we make from that bar, we are going to donate to Ballyfermot Adults Learning Together. So, I'd encourage people to kind of keep an eye out for that, or if you're interested in that, maybe to contact myself and we can kind of talk around that. But so my main aim is kind of to use my contacts both in Ireland and Ecuador to bring people together, to produce chocolate that's fair trade and to produce what I consider to be a far superior product anyway. So that's the end of my presentation today, guys. And thanks everybody for listening. If anybody has any questions, I can stay on for a couple of minutes. Or if anybody wants to come in or add anything, I'd love some feedback of how you found it. I know it was probably a little bit long, but I just felt, I felt the important part was to go through how chocolate was made, because Patrick and Kelly kind of said to me that that was the important part, that people need to know the process as well, how you get from the bean to the bar. So I felt, that I needed to go in there with that as well, because they are helping me out as well. So I just felt that I should use what they said to use as well. So that's me. I'll stop talking. If anybody else wants to come in there now.
Sorry, I have to say I really enjoyed your lecture. I thought it was really, really interesting. I have to say I learned a lot more than I was expecting to. So I didn't think there was much to the topic, maybe, and you've shown me a lot more than I was thinking of. So yeah, you've definitely given me food for thought. And I suppose I've often heard that there is stigma around chocolate and child labour and stuff, but I suppose I never sat down and actually thought about it seriously, I guess. So that's what you've done for me anyway. So thanks so much. We enjoyed it.
Great, thank you.
And Mark.
Yeah.
Mark, I'd like to thank you as well. I thought it was great information there this morning. I had the same as Jackie there. I had never given much thought to what was going on. I eat chocolate and I never, that's as far as the wrapper was as much as I put into it, thrown in the bin. But thanks very much. It was very enjoyable and great information. And even the history of it and how it all came about was great. The same as Jackie, I thought you were going to show us how to make chocolate this morning. So I'm pleasantly surprised. I prefer being in the learning group, and I prefer information rather than doing
it would have been nice to be in person and get to have a taste of all this lovely chocolate.
Yeah.
So all I can say there is go to Lidl and pick up some of the products and taste
I
them.
will. I certainly will.
Yeah.
I've got a
Yeah.
greater understanding of fair trade. I only knew it in relation to coffee, and I hadn't ever considered it in relation to other products. So,
Yeah.
so thanks, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well done, Mark. That was brilliant.
Thanks very much. And sorry about Peppa Pig. I'm babysitting.
Ah, you're grand. I thought it was coming from Mark's computer.
I tried to keep him quiet down the other end, listening to Peppa Pig while I was listening.
It's not easy.
It was kind of an appropriate time when he was talking about child labour, and here we are with Peppa Pig in the back.
I know. I know. I never really looked at chocolate like that, but yeah, I've heard the fair trade chocolate is good, you know, so I'll be going up for the way to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
No,
thanks very much. It was
no
very
problem.
interesting.
No problem,
Thanks, Mark.
Like, I guess what I'm saying is, if people just try it, I'm not saying to go and completely change your habit, but even if you try it to see what it's like, and some people aren't, they don't think it's sweet enough for them. But if you look at particularly dark chocolate, and if you look at we'll say it says 30% dark chocolate, that means that there's 30% sugar there. If you say 70% dark chocolate, that's 70% sugar, 30% chocolate. So just to be aware of those things as well, if you're trying to reduce your sugar content. And obviously the less sugar, the more bitter the chocolate is. But play around with it is what I'm saying, and maybe be a bit mindful of where your chocolate's coming from. So I've kind of took the thing since I came back to decide that I would change from big products to smaller products. And I guess I'm not asking everybody to change, but if we all just do one little thing, I suppose we're helping in a little way.
Yeah,
I think the hardest part is you have to actually make that choice, because it's so easy to walk into the shop and just pick up anything and not care about what choice you're making. But to be conscious about actually deciding that you're going to make the right choice, in that moment, or even being able to find the products. They're you have to look for them. They're not just in your face.
Yeah.
I seen Easter eggs really cheap in the shop, and I said to myself, how can they actually make them so cheap?
How you know?
They're selling 5 for €5.
Yeah, €1 in the package.
Yeah,
packaging
now you
alone.
can understand with the beans being so cheaply bought,
And the quality is usually less. There's very little actual chocolate product in the mass-produced ones. You're getting
but it just shows you, and they're Cadbury's and good ones, well, what you would think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'd be all up in Lidl's. We'd probably meet up there.
I just went a little this morning, but you'll get, if you look around like in Dunn's and Tesco, other places, you'll find, if you look for the fair trade symbol, you'll find things. But this was very well advertised in Lidl this morning. It's $1.89 a bar, I think. So.
Do you know the first place I saw fair trade chocolate was in Marks and Spencer's?
Yeah. And there is places where it is slightly, like it is a bit more expensive, but at least now where the money is going to. That's what I would say about that. And it is a little bit more expensive, but if you try it, I can guarantee you.
No.
Thanks very much.
No problem.
Thanks, Mark. All right.
Great.
Appreciate that.
Well done.
Can I just ask from
Good luck with your award. Good luck with the award as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, best of luck to you.
Yeah.
Can I
thanks.
ask
Best of
one
luck,
more
Mark.
question, please, guys?
Thanks for the gesture of giving us some profits as well.
No
Given
problem.
Hold on, Gary. I think you want to ask
Very
another
good.
question.
Can I ask a question to the BALT group there as well, please, just before I finish up?
Go ahead.
So obviously I'm giving this as part of my experience and stuff like that, but I'm also involved in stuff because I went back to college myself as an adult, and kind of I'm all for promoting adult education and promoting ways back to college and stuff like that. So, and I wasn't really aware of BALT until I came across this group and met up with them. So I'm a little bit aware of what you do and what you're involved in. But what I'll say is, if anybody wants to take my details and get them from Douglas or Una, I have no problem coming and talking to people if they want to talk about going back to college or how to get to college as an adult, or if you want to talk about things about applying to Trinity as a mature student or going through the access program, or going to college as a mature student, I have no problem coming and talking to people, even one-on-one, if people want help with like how to apply or filling in CAO forms or CVs or how to get onto courses or different things like that, because of how to apply for a grant. Because I've been through all that process. I'm in second year of my fourth year degree in social work at the moment. So
Yeah, very good. Thanks.
fire away if people want to come to me and kind of ask about those things in the future if you're
Great,
interested.
great. That's what we're all about. That's brilliant. Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
stuff.
you. Thank you for that.
I'm going to stop recording there. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.